The book does not really have a chapter that talks about file systems, and yet chapter 6, where we talk about I/O, really does um, use files, and you need to have some understanding of them. So we're going to have a brief lecture on what file systems are. So you've used a file system before, probably without knowing it. It's simply an organized collection of directories and files. You may say, well, what's a directory? Well, you know a directory is a folder. If I am trying to find some file on my computer, let's say that I want to find this PowerPoint presentation, I would simply go through a series, clicking on a series of folders. So it's in the CS102 folder, and it's in Spring 13, it's in Notes, and then it's somewhere here in the under File Systems. So I would double click on File Systems. And when I did that, lo and behold, it brings up this file. So again, directory is a folder. A file is a permanent repository of information. And there's various types of files. Some are what we call human readable. C++ source files, you can read them. HTML files, which are used for displaying the content of web pages. And .text files, which you haven't seen yet, but which you'll see in chapter 6, which is a way to input data, say a set of temperatures. So just to give you some examples, here's an HTML file. Okay, you may or may not have seen it, but it's what's called a markup language, where you use markup like H2 here to indicate that this is a header. Here we're saying we want Perl to be bold-faced, and here we're saying we want a new paragraph. So this is called a human readable file. You can read its contents. Here's a data file. This is a list of baby names and their rankings. So in 2004, Jacob was the most popular men's or boy's name, and Emily was the most popular girl's name. There's also binary files, which are only machine readable, and they use some type of encoding that a program is able to interpret. And we call them binary files because they're a file of zeros and ones. So if you looked at them, you would just see a seemingly senseless set of zeros and ones, but a program is going to have a way to, in effect, decode these zeros and ones. And there's different standards that different standards that specify the encoding. So for example, the JPEG standard specifies a type of picture file. MP4 is a type of encoding for video files. Wave is a type of encoding for audio files. .xls is an encoding for Excel files, and .doc is an encoding for Word files. And you often see these files if you are making your way through a directory. Okay, so an important thing is how can you navigate to a file. And as a human, you just click on the folder icons as I just showed you. But as a computer, you need to have what's known as a path. And it's simply a string with a set of directories followed by the file name. So in Windows, you typically start with what's called the drive. So this would be the C drive, and then a colon. So the drive name and a colon. And then you use backslashes as delimiters between the directory names. So here we have a directory called path. Again, you would see it as a human as a folder, but computer needs to see it as a name separated by, in this case, backslashes. And then the final element of the path is the file name. And it's similar on the Mac, except you don't have a drive, so it just starts with a zero or more path or directory names separated by forward slashes in this case, and then the last element of the path name is always the file name. So here's an example on my Macintosh. that I have a number of directories, the home directory, BVZ, CS102, Fall 12, Labs, Lab 6, and then if the computer follows that sequence of directories, it will eventually get to a directory containing the file part.a.cpp. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to use a shell which you have seen when your computer pops up the console output. Well, it turns out you can also often type into it. So I am going to change directory, that's CD on a Mac, to home. Okay, then the directory BVZ, then the directory 102, then Spring 13, Lab 6, and actually, sorry, Labs, then Lab 6, and that gets me to a directory. Well, in fact, it's saying there is no such directory. That's correct because on this computer, the first directory is users. There we go. Now we're in the Lab 6 directory, and I would be able to access part.a.cpp. So I could say now lab6 and vi gets me into an editor, part.a.cpp, and so as you can see, a C++ source file. I could have actually done it just by specifying the full path name in part.a.cpp. Same thing would have happened. So that's an introduction to file systems and path names, and in Chapter 6 you'll see how we use them in order to read the contents of files into programs and also direct output of files to, or output of programs to files.